Secretary of State under fire tonight amid calls for her resignation from Colorado Republicans. It comes after partial passwords for voting systems were posted in a spreadsheet that anyone could download from the Secretary of State's website.
We talked to Secretary of State Griswold this afternoon, who says only partial passwords were exposed, so she says it didn't pose an immediate security threat to Colorado elections.
Colorado's elections have layers of security. So you actually need 2 passwords and physical access to voting equipment to use the passwords for them to be worth anything. A civil servant who hid the tabs on that spreadsheet is no longer with the department.
Secretary Griswold says the passwords were online for months before her office was notified last Thursday.
Republicans are demanding she resign. State Minority Leader Rose Puglisi released these statements on behalf of Colorado House Republicans, saying, quote, "While I have the utmost trust in the integrity of our county clerks who actually oversee the counting of votes, I have no trust that Secretary Griswold is capable of leading our election system. Enough of her incompetence. It's time for her to resign."
Secretaries of State nationwide are dealing with attacks on election integrity.
Here in Colorado, we learned 12 ballots were intercepted in the mail, filled out, and returned in Mesa County last Thursday.
Now, most of those ballots were flagged. They were caught by fraud detecting technology, but 3 did make it through. Now, up in the Northwest, in Vancouver, Washington, and in Portland, Oregon, hundreds of ballots were burned when 2 ballot boxes were set on fire.
Michael Breenberger, an assistant professor with American politics at the University of Denver, joins us now. Michael, thank you so much for being here tonight. So what do these incidents do to public perception when it comes to our election integrity?
Well, we live in such a polarized environment where people are quick to interpret any sort of event as sort of affirming whatever their side believes about elections, when most of the time what's going on are isolated incidents that are not part of any systemic challenges to having fair and free elections.
So just how, we talked about Mesa County, so it does happen, it did happen, it has happened, but how actually prevalent is fraud in elections?
Well, what we know is that there is tons of evidence that there's no systemic fraud in elections. When you have millions of voters casting elections across thousands of jurisdictions, right, elections are run at a local level. We have tons of local election officials who are running elections all over our country. What we know is even though there may be some isolated incidents, there is no systemic fraud that's likely to have any measurable impact on our elections.
It seems like we never would hear much about what the Secretary of State is doing, let alone their involvement in elections. Is there a lot more scrutiny on our elections these days than before the 2020 election?
Absolutely. So after Donald Trump's loss in the previous election, he tried to place blame on his loss at the feet of election administrators and claiming that there was fraud without any real evidence. And of course, this was all litigated in court, and in no case was it found to be that there was evidence of fraud in our elections. But of course, democracies run on trust, and it's much easier to break down trust than to build it.
So one more question here before we let you go. It seems that there is some preemptive table setting here before the vote from the Trump campaign saying, we see there might be some fishy stuff going on, so seem to be setting it up. If they lose, they can go see, we told you this was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. This is part of the Trump campaign's organization, is to sort of set the table, as you said, right, for claims of fraud. So there are people, they have what they're calling poll watchers, but people are helping to document what they perceive as fraud. And you know, elections are a complex process, and often it's easier to spin something as a conspiracy than just a very complicated process that's hard to understand.
All right, Michael, thanks for coming in. We always appreciate your expertise out
Thanks
here.
for having me.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Well, if you haven't yet cast your ballot, we have everything you need to know posted on our voter guide. We have one-on-one interviews with some congressional candidates to help you make an informed decision, and we've also got a breakdown of key ballot measures that you'll see at the polls. You can